Oh, this is the caricature. That said it was awesome.
Very, very informative.
Yeah.
No, that's,
Very full time effort, and money for sure. Money for sure.
I don't think it's gonna last much past that.
We should ask him how his application run, what's going.
Yeah, we should, shouldn't we? Yeah, we should.
Hi. I want to introduce you to my father, Dr. Rosenhaus, Jerry Holzhauer.
Nice to meet you. We'll see you. You're in the safest place in town.
You don't run on my road anymore.
I don't want to run out of chairs.
But you were on, you were behind. She used to run.
He used to run, I used to drive by and go, what do you want?
Sorry.
I had asked you and I told her I saw you every time I saw it work.
We'll play it.
And my dad wants to know about the generator.
Right now, we're
Okay. We can chat.
Yes,
We can chat.
I'll be quiet.
Yeah, 23rd. Everything else should be okay.
So you're 3 weeks behind?
Yeah, right.
Right. No, you're ahead of me then, Charlie. I'm still at Memorial Day. All right. Unless we get some late comers, I think we have enough chairs. That's awesome. All right, so we're at 5:20. Karen, you still, we're about 2 minutes away. And you guys know how I feel. This makes my day when I see life in the boardroom. I wish we could pack this every single meeting.
Careful with your.
Can we?
It is the safest 100 yards in the town of Webster at the moment.
I think next Thursday is the 5th Thursday of June, so you all have off. I will not do it to you, Bill. I'm not going to do it to you, Bill. All right? It's your 4th of July starting early.
Thank you.
All right? You ready? All right. All right, we are on. We are live. So, hey, welcome everybody in attendance and also on, I think, live on the website, YouTube, to the Thursday, June 23rd Webster Town Board Workshop. Tonight we have 5 agenda items. And our first one up is a presentation discussion of the ARPA grant applications received in the town of Webster from the various nonprofit organizations in town. And Paul Adams, our finance director, is presenting. So,
all right. As you know, the town decided a few weeks ago to actually take a portion of the state and local recovery funds and issue them to local nonprofits, organizations, to benefit those that have suffered through the pandemic. The U.S. Treasury actually issued the final rule, was effective April 1st, 2022. You might ask yourself, why are the grants being offered to Webster-based nonprofit organizations? And the final rule provides for nonprofits that have faced significant challenges due to the pandemic. So it's an appropriate way to use the funds. So for the final rule, the town may consider the following regarding nonprofit organizations. Those that have experienced decreased revenue, financial insecurity, increased costs, and challenges covering payroll, rent, mortgage, or other costs. We had decided to earmark $350,000 for grants. The town actually formed a committee of 3 people, that's Jenny, myself, and Bill, to go through the applications, which actually were actually made available during the month of May, and they were due back to my department by the end of May. And then in June, the 3 of us got together and sorted through all the information. We actually asked for quite a bit of financial information and other documentation to support the nonprofits that actually applied. So the applications were reviewed for completeness, and they were actually rated. We came up with a rating scale based on certain metrics, which included the severity of financial and operational impact caused by COVID, the eligibility of intended use of funds, the effective impact of the funds if they're not received, the degree that the funding will follow assistance to those impacted by COVID, public health impact, the degree that the funding will allow the organization to continue to provide services, the measurement of whether the services are vital to the community, and the measurement of the population served within the town. So we rated each of these metrics on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest. Based on the review process, we ended up with awards totaling $319,000. We're actually recommending to the board that grants be given to Blessed Hope Community Church, Challenger Miracle Field, Seal Ministries, Friends of Webster Trails, Emmanuel Lutheran Church, Knights of Columbus, Naples, Webster Association of Senior Program Supporters, Webster Comfort Care, Webster Community Chest, Webster Hope, Webster Museum and Historical Society, Webster Soccer Association, and the Webster Union Cemetery. So there are actually 14 organizations in all.
Is there any way you can make the slide bigger?
Pardon?
Is there any way you can make the slide larger?
I don't think so. I think we have, it's on full screen.
Yep.
Unfortunately.
Yep, and
You can make it
for
larger.
attendees, okay, and I appreciate everybody being here, it's a workshop. This is out on the town website. Karen might be able to opine on that. I
Yeah,
think it
print a
was
copy.
uploaded yesterday, so it's accessible.
Okay.
All right. And Paul's doing a very good job of almost word for word reading.
Yeah, but I can't hear,
So,
can't hear.
okay.
Yeah, basically reading it. So the grant awards are expected to be approved at the July 7th town board meeting. Each grantee will be expected to execute a grant agreement, which I've compiled. ARPA funds were expected to be dispersed on July 22nd after the July 21st town board meeting. As part of the agreement, the town will have the right to audit the grants related to expenditures. So in the future, the town may ask for documentation to make sure that what was detailed in the purpose by the different organizations, the monies are actually being expended for those purposes. Or if not, you'll be able to explain to us why. So, just some compliance things. The town is actually required to file an annual report with the U.S. Department of Treasury. We filed the first one at the end of April, and it'll be due on an annual basis, March 31st of each year through 2026. So they're basically due April of each year. And I'll have to provide details within that, how we have spent the money. Any questions?
Okay, I just want to make sure, thank you, Paul. When Paul, I don't know how many attendees, and like I said, I love when the room is full. But if it's your first time coming to a town board workshop, when the finance director, Paul, says any questions, he's really directing those to the town board members. Tonight's not a, per se, public hearing or whatever, where the attendees are the ones asking the questions. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that. So, does anybody have any questions?
Well, I'd like to first thank the subcommittee and for the work that they've done. And we spent a lot of hours researching this, taking the applications in. I realize that 350,000 was earmarked, yet we've only dedicated 319,000. I know that I expressed a desire for bringing that up to 350,000. So I guess my question is, for the subcommittee members and this board as a whole, can we consider perhaps changing and increasing the amount or amounts, the amount of the 319 to increase it by 31 and take it up to the 350,000 dollar amount that was earmarked?
I don't know if that's really a fair question to tender solely to Paul.
Yeah.
Well, I'm tendering it to the entire
Sure.
board.
And I will, if you guys don't mind, I'm gonna chime in on John's question. The easy answer to that is yes, all right? The more complicated answer to that is that I was really pleased by the way that we formatted this to somewhat over the last couple months take emotion and bias out of this process. You know, I'm a third-degree Knight of Columbus, so I would be like, let's get as much money for the Knights of Columbus as possible, all right? Councilman Cahill is the liaison to EMS, so he is obviously going to be wanting as much to EMS as possible. This is just human biases. It's not good, bad, or indifferent. It's just a reality. So we assessed that up front and made a very good decision as a board, a pragmatic, rational decision to try to take the biases out of that, maximize out to get as much applications in on this as possible. And we did, I think. We got 14 applications, and we are awarding 14 grants. So every agency that applied is getting awarded money. Now, with that being said, as Paul explained, a tangible metric was done, 1 through 10, on several factors. Based on those factors, it drove the decision making, and it ended up aggregating to 319,000. Now, if this board wants to, because our plan is tentatively to announce the awards and give them out, if you want to call it that, not with checks on this date, but at the next board meeting on July 7th. Now, between tonight and July 7th is 2 weeks, and we did this purposely. Paul is explaining what we've done, coming to the conclusions that they came with, which was the committee, the subcommittee, to take out bias and all those metrics, and it came to 319. If we want to, as a board, go to 350, then it's very possible that the entities that would be awarded additional money will not be the ones that certain board members have asked about having additional monies go to. Because if you ask for more money to a certain agency, but that agency scored 9 out of 14, why would we give the 9th one more money? Wouldn't we want to give the 8th, 7th, 6th, 5th, whatever? So we would be opening a Pandora's box, but we purposely left 14 days between today and July 7th for situations and questions and things such as Councilman Cahill just brought up. And also, where we have met all the timelines we laid out back 2 months ago. When we laid this out, we said, this is what we want to do. We'll have the portal open for grant applications. We'll open it until this date, then the committee, subcommittee will look at it, then they'll do this, that, come here on June 23rd with their findings, and by July 7th, we will award them. We can move that July 7th date. I don't think it's a good idea, but if there wants to be more discernment of this, that's fine. I don't agree with that, and I will just say this. I said at the beginning, sure, we can move it to 350. Basically, we could move it to $4 million. We can move it to any number we want that's within the $4 million that the town was given. But the town board said maximum 350 and then came up with the rubrics, and it came out at 319. Now, with that being said, what Finance Chair Paul Adams did not say was that he did say the 14 entities that he's proposing, or the committee is proposing awards for. They aggregate to 319. Those 14 agencies in aggregate asked for $820,000, Paul?
Correct.
Okay. It was all over the board. And that's why that rubric, and trying to take emotion and bias out of it, came down to the awards, and they happened to aggregate to 319. So, I guess, and I'm sorry if I was too verbose on this, I want to hand off that answer to Ginny and Patty and Bill, understanding also that Patty and I are the ones that were not on this advisory committee. It was Ginny and Bill, so their answers on this may be very different than Patty's and mine, because they were tasked, Ginny and Bill, with Paul, of being the advisory committee that we entrusted to give this metric and take emotion out of it. I will sum it up. I don't think we should go over the 319. We should respect the process, and I don't think we should go beyond July 7th, the date that we have set up in the schedule. We've met every tangible date so far in this process. I think we should continue on with that. So that's all I got to say about that. That's a long-winded answer, John.
It sure is.
Thank you.
I want to point out that when we had the original discussion with respect to the 350 and opening it up to the 501c3s, which I completely agree with, and I think it's a fantastic idea. Part of that discussion and expression was made that while we may have a significant number of 501c3s, do we open up, or are we open to increasing the 350 to possibly 500,000? And I know that that's the point I had made, to increase the aggregate, and I know, Tom, that you had made the point also that we could also lower that amount. But I just wanted to bring that up again also, as part of the discussion.
Well, John, we all discussed the amount we were going to award. I know you didn't like the fact that it wasn't 500,000, that it was 350,000.
I agree.
I understand it.
Yep.
But this board decided on 350,000, and that's where we're at.
Yep.
When we went through this and tried to be as judicious as we could in assigning numbers to these organizations, this is what we came up with. Now, you may not agree with us, but that's the best we could do, trying to be as fair and impartial as we could. Now, Ginny had a different number to give, and I had a different number to award. So when we got together with Paul, we put all those numbers together and came up with what we agreed to award. Now, it wasn't, we just didn't say, well, we're not going to give somebody something. That's not how it worked. All the numbers are there for you to look at. I think you've been provided with them.
Yes, I have.
I'm not sure, but when you look through those numbers, you'll see why the monies were applied the way they were. I don't think it's confusing at all as to what we did.
No, and I respect the work that you all put into it, and I also respect the fact that we're having a discussion and allowing each board member to express their position, and that's what boards should be doing, in my opinion. We don't always have to agree. We're not always going to have to agree, which is a good thing, but allowing each board member to express their feelings on a particular position or a particular issue, I think is a very good thing. So I appreciate and I respect your position and your opinion and the work that you did in putting this together.
So I would like to jump in a little bit, if you don't mind. I would like to thank Paul Adams, our financial director, for coming up with the metrics and the point system for the ARPA grant for our Webster-based nonprofit organization. And like everybody, we all heard, Paul, Bill, and I have spent many hours looking over the applications for the grants. And it's not easy for us to come up with a number to see who have more and who have less. But again, we base upon the metrics system that Paul have created so we can be fair for everyone. And we graded them according to their scores. And I wish I could have we have the grants to give everybody the amount that they requested it. That would be wonderful, but we don't. So I would encourage all the applications, to look at this grant as extra funding for your nonprofit organization. That is may not as much as you would like for it to be, but it's something extra that you do not currently have right now. And please look at the glass as half full, then rather see it as it's half empty. And and again, thank you for everybody here. And like I said, we wish that we could do more, but it's the best we can do right now.
I'm the only one who hasn't had anything to say. I was anxious to hear both Bill and Ginny because they were part of the subcommittee that reviewed this. And I just want to say I was really pleased to see the process, and I respect that process. I think that the rubric that was put in place for scoring these applications was spot on. I think you did a great job with it. And as I said, I do respect the process, and I respect the recommendation. Ginny, you're right. Everyone would like to be awarded everything that they asked for, and that just isn't possible. I'm only going to suggest one thing, and that is if there is an appetite on this board to go to the 350 amount, as John said, we're looking at 31,000 in addition. I would suggest that that be awarded to the 14 organizations, divided among the 14 organizations according to the scores of the rubric. Now that's some pretty fancy math that's beyond me, but
It's really not.
but that's what I would suggest if we want to do that and go to the 350.
I would agree with that.
Wouldn't bother me in the least. And Paul, correct me if I'm wrong,
Not a bad idea.
you would take every score, and I think they range from
Yeah.
21 or 16 up to,
17 to 62
Stop.
or something like that.
you add them all up, you'd add them all up, and whatever that number is, let's say it's 300.
Yeah.
And then you take the score of the entity, and let's say it's 27, let's say it's 30. And 30 divided by 300 is 10%. You'd take 10% of the additional $31,000 and you'd give them that $3,100.
Yeah, pro rata.
It doesn't seem like fancy math.
Pretty cut and dry.
That I could get behind.
Okay.
I mean, and
I
I
think
say
that's more
that,
than
but
fair.
then again, Bill and Jenny, we weren't on that committee. I know the work you did, so I'm more interested in hearing, the advisory committees and how you went about it, what you think about that.
The board has their own voice, and I'm not going against the full voice of the board, so whatever the board decides, I'm fine.
Well, I think, and like I said, we got 2 weeks until July 7th, that we would then be doing a resolution on July 7th that would be then listing down the 14 and what is proposed that adds up to either 319 or 350, right?
Could I just make one more point? I have no desire to go beyond the July 7th. We need to wrap this up.
I agree.
Okay.
And the input for the reallocation will come completely from Paul, with the intent that it reaches the 350 and no more.
Yes. Thank you, Patty.
Because there was a rational, non-emotional. It didn't get into, well, this non-for-profit brought 5 people to this meeting, this one brought 20, so we really should give more money to the one that brought 20. I wouldn't have agreed with that. The way we just described it, that makes sense. So let's rock with that. All right, well, we went a few minutes over on that one, but now we're, the next item up tonight is, Paul, you're still up. A presentation and recommendations on the town capital project financing by Paul Adams, our finance director.
Yeah, we have some significant borrowing coming up, so we'll just stop here to review where we're at. As you know, with the Sandbar Park, that project is underway. We're going to do a bond anticipation note, which are one-year short-term financing notes, and we have not borrowed yet. We're trying to decide when to borrow, which looks like it may be later in the year. So I took a look at project costs through December of 2023 to try to figure out how much we're going to need to make various projects we're going to talk about work. So for Sandbar Park, it looks like we'd have to borrow about $3,189,000. That would, if you paid interest only, which is an option, the debt service cost in the 2023 budget would be $128,000. Now, since this is a park improvement, we can actually utilize the Parkland Trust Fund to help offset the debt service costs. So far, I'll be proposing in the 23 budget that we transfer $60,000 from Parkland Trust Fund, which would net the debt service cost for 23 down to $68,000. And then keep in mind that there are also phases 2 and phases 3 and the building, which would probably involve borrowing another $3 million. The first phase is heavily loaded with grants. So there's a good chunk is being paid by grants. There's over $5 million in grants. The next project is our wastewater treatment plant, phase 2. I've been working with Navitas to take a look at the cash flow through December of 2023. And it looks like they're going to be ordering quite a bit of equipment over the next few months. So there will be some significant expenditures within that time frame. So it looks like by the end of December of 23, we'll be expending $21,750,000. The plan is to use $2.5 million of ARPA funds, which is the state and local recovery funds that we just spoke of. So our net debt service for the first year will be $19,250,000. If you pay principal and interest on that, that's going to be about $1.1 million. As I just mentioned with the Sandbar project, with bond anticipation notes, in year 1 you actually do have the option to pay interest only. If you pay interest only, the cost will be, it's hard to say with the way interest rates are going these days, but it might be 4%, which would be like $880,000. I hope it's not that high. Sure isn't that way. So to fund the project through completion, the town would actually need to borrow $28,498,000. That's assuming that we don't get a WIA grant, which we are in the process of applying for, and possibly other grants may kick in. So we're hoping for that. If you don't get the grant, the total debt service cost per year is going to be like $1.6 million, principal and interest, once it finally gets rolled to serial funds. So that's a significant amount of debt to bring on. If you look at from a sewer rent point of view, for every $100,000 of debt service that you include in the budget, it increases the sewer capital rate by $6.46. So for that $1.1 million, that's $70.97. For $1.6 million, it's about $104. So, as I mentioned, the timing for the ban issue, the plan plan right now is to borrow in late November, early December. That's something we'll have to talk about. It could possibly be delayed until January of '23, which means that the first interest payment wouldn't actually be due until '24. So it actually would push it to the next budget year, which might give us a little relief. So I think it's good to float this as long as we can, because obviously the sooner we borrow, the sooner we start incurring interest costs. The longer we can push it off, the better. But as bills come in, it's tougher to do. Number 4 I already covered. And we have 2 smaller projects, the Linda Lane sewer lines and the Woodard Road sewer lines. They're both very similar. Linda Lane, the cost is actually $209,000, but there's going to be a $30,000 contribution from a contractor. So it looks like the residents are going to have to pay about $179. There's only 6 or 7 residents, so this is quite a bit to take on. The cost, New York State actually has a maximum of $706 that a resident is allowed to pay without special approval by New York State. Both of these projects exceed the $706. So Art's actually putting together an application right now, which will go to New York State Department of Law. Will eventually go to the Office of State Controller for approval. So basically, then what I mean to say, we're looking at borrowing these internally. So generally we go to a bond anticipation note and then eventually go to a surety bond. Since these are both relatively small, you're actually allowed to borrow from your reserve funds. So for Linda Lane, we're looking to borrow from the Sewer Capital Reserve Fund, $179,000, and for Woodard Road, we're looking to borrow $142,000 from the Sewer Workers' Compensation Reserve Fund. So basically, it's treated as an investment of the reserve funds. It's still long-term debt. There still has to be a bond resolution passed, and it's done so that the investments or the debt is callable. So at some point, if those reserve funds need this money back, we could at that point issue a serial bond for the balance and restore the funds in the reserve funds. So doing the self-funding option does help streamline it. And actually, in the bond market, issuances this small are very attractive, so I think it's a good idea. And in the long run, it will help the reserve funds. So we can charge, a market interest rate, which would probably be an interest rate less than what you would get on a bond, but it's still more than the town can earn as an investment. And overall, it saves the residents a little bit of money. So that's what we have on our plate. It's all going to be part of the '23 budget and future budgets. Any questions?
No, thank you, Paul. Certainly, this is information we need as we go into the budget process, which we are delving into now. We started meetings this week. And thank you for your work on both 5 and 6, because I've been part of those discussions all week. It's been going back and forth. It's amazing how much time we have spent on the 2 smallest projects, but that's often the way it goes. And hopefully getting all that paperwork onto the groups in Albany who need to see it, we'll be able to get this done sooner than later.
The Sewer Capital Reserve actually has a balance of about $1.4 million, and the Compensation Reserve only has a balance of $205, but to tell you the truth, it's really used. And we can earmark more funds to go in that reserve if we need to.
Jane?
Thank you.
Chad? Bill?
No, I'm good, thank you.
I don't know if it's so much a question, but I wrote down 3 points that I think are important to understand, and what can be sometimes a mind-numbing thing to hear numbers and all that stuff. It's a bit layman, but Paul brought up the option of interest only on these one-year bonds. When you pay interest only, obviously you have a less payment than when you're paying full interest and principal. There's really two benefits to that. I was kind of surprised to hear from Paul, being an old mortgage industry guy.
Right.
The products that were interest only had a higher interest rate than the ones that paid interest, principal and interest. He says that's not the case. You pay the same interest rate whether you decide to pay principal or just interest. Well, to me that was a no-brainer because the two things that we're trying to achieve through that is the lower the payment, the reality is that helps us stay up with the tax cap. Because a principal and interest payment or an interest-only payment does count toward a budget's year tax cap.
Yeah, yes, it does.
Okay. The other thing it does is I call it buys us time on two things that pertain to grants. One, we've said we are going to apply for grants as much as we can, especially on the $31 million sewer project. And even the ones that we've been awarded, like on Sandbar Park, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of times we have to pay out the money to contractors and then remit to the state for reimbursement.
We do. That's how they all work.
And the state, if you've ever dealt with New York State, they may take a year to reimburse us. So if we're front-loading that money, we have to borrow the money, waiting for it to come back. So it just makes sense to pay only interest only on it, and wait for the money to come back from the state and pay off the bond. Is that about correct?
That's about correct. With the ready grants, which there are 3 involved in this project, we found so far that the state has been paying quicker than what we've experienced with some of the other grants. But the DOS grants, which there's a couple of those, seems to take much longer to get paid.
Yeah. Yeah. And then last but not least, because when Paul kind of showed me this, you know, I'm not immune from sticker shock. So when he said, hey, you know, the sewer, 23 million, and the 1 million interest, all that. The thing that is unfortunate that doesn't really factor in is that we have shown at previous town board meetings that part of that project, the sewer project, is such advanced technology that has return on investment day one. It is going to be revenue generating for us day one, and it is going to cut several expense items day one. And we went through this thoroughly last year as a town board to the point where the aggregate of that revenue production and the cost savings spit off enough money to almost, well, it paid for the whole 11 million portion of the sewer project. And it spit off enough extra cash flow to help pay the rest of the bonds on that. Not all of them.
Right.
But so, I think that's important to bring up because in a vacuum, we only talk about the debt that is going to have. I think we lose a very big component of why the town board went down the path to do the bond resolution on $31 million.
Yeah, you've got to get through a couple years of debt while you're doing the project.
Right.
Before you see the revenue, so
You got it.
probably won't see revenue until 2025 or late 24.
So,
So,
that wasn't any questions, Paul, but I figured I'd go.
and endure some pain first.
There you go. All right, well, anything else on that? Paul, thanks.
Thank you, Paul.
You're welcome.
All right, Chris, we're not too far behind, are we? All right, 6 o'clock item is a presentation update on the expression of interest process for the Sandbar Park Restaurant. It's 6:05, and Chris Bilo, our Parks and Rec Commissioner, is going to give that presentation. So as he slides into the hot seat, I'll hand the baton to Chris.
Let's see if I can do this right.
So what I wanted to do is give everybody on the board just kind of an update as to where we stand as the expression of interest process has obviously begun, and where the discussions have taken us, and kind of make sure everybody understands kind of the steps that have transpired since the EOI opened, and then obviously the submissions deadline came. So from a timeline, just as an update, the end of the EOI's the submission deadline was April 8th. The process started in, I'll say late December. It was late December, early January. I think it was advertised around the 22nd of December. So we started taking questions, etc. Early January. As part of this process, as you may have recalled, there were 5 addendums as the expression of interest process kind of played out. Those were all done as a result of questions and comments that were coming in from potential submitters. As a result, on April 8th, there was one submission that was received at the deadline that actually happened to be from the previous facility down in the Bayside. So from a selection standpoint, it was sort of a simpler process to be able to begin, I'll say, meetings or discussions since it was just the one. We did have several, as I mentioned in those addendums, we did have several interested groups. However, when that submission did go or end on April 8th, we did just end up with just the one. So after we had kind of looked through that initial or that submission, the first meeting we reached out and we met with Rob and Tom, who were the submitters, also owners of former Bayside. Myself and the supervisor met with them. And basically the intent of that was, I'll get on the next slide, or in a couple slides, just sort of allow them to have an opportunity to go through this submission. As a result of that meeting, we ended up having a second one with them a few weeks ago, back on June 14th. Kind of brings us to where we are now. So there's been 2 face-to-face meetings with Rob and Tom since this process is wrapped up. Just for general information, I did not put all the information, and I didn't include that in here, but I did pull out a number of the topics that either were pertinent to the discussions that we had in either of the meetings, but also relevant to the information that was submitted in the EOI. So some of the things that was asked as part of that expression of interest related around the vision, the information that was shared was, that the vision of that restaurant or that facility is to operate in a very similar manner as with the original restaurant, with improvements specifically to accommodate more customers. Bayside, or the restaurant, would expect to have around $600,000 in their estimation in pre-opening costs. Some of those include things such as trade and work, kitchen equipment, initial inventory, insurance, signage, computer system. And again, that's assuming from a building or a facility standpoint, that's a shell or a vanilla box. So basically provided them that structure, and then they would take care of the inside to the tune of around $600,000. As part of the EOI, we did ask for some information from an expense breakdown. One of the items that was listed in the expression of interest, they did list and I know it's not technically called a rent, but that's the common term for their monthly payback. And they had that listed out at $3,600 a month, which is about on par where they were at the end of their operation. One of the assumptions that they had listed, again, as I mentioned, is just the vanilla box, which is basically the roof, exterior walls, floors, windows, and then an unfinished interior. One of the assumptions that they did have in the UI was seeking a credit or some sort of a rent concession to finish that interior. And that would be a negotiation piece. They were seeking a 10-year minimum agreement. Obviously, as you're aware in some of our discussions, we could go up to a 15-year. So that was reassuring. And then the restaurant, one of the items that they also listed as part of their assumption is that the facility would be responsible basically for all interior items, any type of repair, et cetera, inside. All exterior repairs, maintenance would be a responsibility of town. Things like, the mowing, landscaping, plowing, building, anything on the outside of the building along with dock repair. And I only point that out because that's a little different than sort of the situation that's down there now, especially from a mowing, plowing, et cetera. That's not on the town's responsibility. From a meeting standpoint, this is the two meetings that we had back in May and then again a couple weeks ago. First meeting, as I mentioned, just sort of an opportunity for us to kind of hear what their vision is, as opposed to reading it through that expression of interest, just to kind of understand where they thought this new facility may, or how it may fit in. We're specific as to sort of their mindset or their vision as to how it fit into this area. We've heard a lot of comments about fit within that area. One of the things that I did mention in that meeting is the way that Sandbar Park area was, I'll say viewed, or sort of the perception was that it was a restaurant location. With the investment that the town now has in that area, obviously our intent is that the perception is that it's a park first. So ideally what we're looking for is a facility that will sort of match that and not try to either overshadow or be part of the background. We want it to be, from a cooperative standpoint, part of that location. We asked, just from an expense standpoint, just some of their annual expense and initial investment around their $600,000, just to give them an opportunity to share some of their reasoning behind some of those costs. Again, we talked about the term length, and obviously being able to have a longer term length than what was noted in the expression of interest was a plus. And then also, we did talk a little bit about the design approach to the building in regards to what the building may look like, the size of the building. Obviously, we know is sort of maxed out at a max of 2,400 square feet. Does it need to be that large? Is that their intent to go that large? Is it a one-story, two-story? So those kind of things. Got a little bit of a better understanding of what their approach is for what that building would or could look like. After that first meeting, one of the things that came out of it, there were a couple of, I'll say, agenda items or to-dos. One was to investigate a land lease option, and then also how the payback of that loan for that shell or vanilla box may work out. So the second meeting, we discussed real briefly that the land lease really doesn't pertain to be an option for that location, for that business. And then from a payback of a loan for the building, again, I'll use the word rent. The question comes: does the town need to collect the total amount due, or are we able to collect less than what may be due in regards to the debt service? And that's really where I think we are with part of this presentation tonight, is to give the information to the town board for their so that they can make a decision on that. In regards to the loan, one of the things Paul was able to do is, from a dollar and cent standpoint, obviously we've been using that 2,400 max square foot, so that numbers could change a little bit if building size does go down. But again, based on the EOI, using a 2,400 square foot building, along with a, I don't want to say expected, but a requested 4,000 square foot exterior patio space, that cost would be somewhere around $1 million. That's, again, factoring in the vanilla box, and again, the cost today is what they were 2-3 years ago when this process may have started. Obviously, it is a little different, but that number is also very similar to where, or what we were given when Password started this process. So just using that $1 million, this type of a bond has a shorter shelf life, so it's a 15-year versus a 30-year. Also has a slightly higher interest rate due to it being a public-private situation. So $1 million bond over 15 years, it breaks down to about $90,000 per year. Divide that over 12 months if you want to calculate again the rent, so to speak. It breaks down to about $7,500 per month. Again, from a future consideration, one of the things in regards to programming, we know the location and the features that are going into that park, but it is the intent of the Parks and Rec Department that location, Sandbar, will be used from a programming standpoint for passive recreation, and any business that's operating, as I mentioned, should also have a similar interest in regards to being collaborative in providing what's best for the community to that area. Obviously, the town is investing, as Paul just got done a few minutes ago, going over the capital cost. We're investing quite a bit, so ideally what we're trying to do is create that area as a destination. And as I mentioned before, it's really sort of going to be the emphasis of our department is to create that as a destination area, whether that's just through programming or awareness to the community of the different features that are going to be now part of that location that weren't before. So we're excited from that standpoint to be able to make this again, what I'll say, a true destination area from a park standpoint. And then obviously from the town, from a consideration standpoint, that the payback of that loan for the building of a shell or that vanilla box, again, using that $1 million model, and again, that could be plus or minus, but again, current environment that seems to be an appropriate number. We are reaching out, trying to see if we can get a little bit more of I'll say a fine-tuned number, but again, for calculation purposes, that seems to be a pretty good figure to be able to focus on. Questions?
Chris, how old was the previous building that they were paying $3,500 a month?
How old was the building?
Yeah, it's pretty old, right?
Extremely.
They were paying,
Yeah.
at the time, they were paying $3,500 for quite a
Correct.
building. And they're looking at a rent fee of $3,600 a month, correct? That's right.
Correct, as part of their expense,
Right.
expense breakdown, that's what they have listed.
So they're expecting a $600,000 in pre-opening costs for, obviously the interior infrastructure. They're also seeking a credit or rent concession to finish the interior. Any dollar amount talked about that?
We haven't got to that point of the discussion yet.
As far as the square footage of the building, 2,400 square feet that's a good sized building. So you're going to be having further discussion, I take it, with respect to what the need would be.
Well, 2,400 is about 800 square feet bigger than what was done previously. And again, these are all our maximum numbers that we know. Obviously, there's still the process of going to the state to be able to get that approved. So that 2,400 could be either approved or it could be, we could run into a situation where they decide that 2,400 is too large of a facility and it needs to be a 1,600.
So the state has the jurisdiction of deciding how?
The DEC.
DEC does? Okay. Has there been any preliminary discussions with DEC with respect to square footage?
Yeah, so as part of this whole Sandbar Park project, there's been, I'll say, not specific to that building, but all of our plans do show a facility at that location, and it does show a square footage of 2,400. So there's been a number of different discussions about it. It hasn't been narrowed down that this is going to be the exact square foot, because we haven't got to that point yet. But we do know that the max that we would be able to go to would be at 2,400.
And Chris, I mean, yeah, the DEC, we've had weekly Zoom or calls and whatever with, I think there's like 9 different government agencies on this about Sandbar Park. one of them being the DEC. And I've learned a new term, I guess, through this process. Is it impervious area? Impervious, right? Bill?
Impervious.
Right? Yeah, yeah.
Asphalt and
You got it. And so, one thing I learned is that until the DEC gives their blessing on this footprint, they seem to, through our meetings, they're saying, well, there was an 800 square foot barn, storage barn that was next to the Bayside, and then there was a 1,600 square foot Bayside, so those two buildings were impervious. So if you're building one building, just add the square foot of those two and we'll go with that. That's the way they've kind of made it sound, for lack of better terms. It's funny, when you were reading some of the highlights of the EOI, the expression of interest that was submitted, they have Rob and Tom suggested a 4,000 square foot concrete patio. And I was like, wow, Bill, I would imagine that's impervious.
Right,
Yeah.
I was just gonna ask that question.
And I've eaten there many times. I know that you got the patio that's out there right now. I know that 4,000 square feet is 200 feet by 200 feet. So it's kind of a detail because I don't think the DEC will ever go with that, but they might go with like direct decking that, the water goes through it into the ground. They wouldn't consider that impervious. Yeah.
they would, because it's a surface that the water has to hit and go off of. So it's anything that's being built that's non-porous
Yeah.
is considered impervious by DEC.
Yeah. Anyway, so, interesting. Any other questions or comments by the board on this?
Thank you for the updates.
And I will, Jenny?
Thank
Would
you
you
for the big stuff.
I was saying, of course, obviously, Chris already stated that the meetings, I attended these meetings with Chris, and, another kind of a moving part on this thing is that a 2,400 square foot one-story building, or you go with a 3,200 square foot two-story building, and how does that affect, well, certainly it doesn't change the impervious, but, I've been very interested in, and we've talked about it with Rob and Tom, is that this $1 million number has flown around for a while. A building and a patio, whatever, it'll cost $1 million. The reality is, and I'm talking about the shell, right, Matt? We're talking about the, delivering them to do the interior and all that. We haven't gone out and actually had an engineering firm do what you call, Bill, I think a PER, P-E-R,
Yes.
that would basically give a certain design and say that based on today's pricing and all that, that's $1 million. So it's interesting because this is kind of the issue, is that, and maybe it's not an issue. The $1 million, if the town has to pay $1 million to build this shell with the patio and whatever. Chris already said, and Paul has helped us with this, that's going to be $7,500 a month in debt financing. So we're struggling with, well, if we just indebted the town citizens for $7,500 a month, how do we justify only getting $3,500 a month in rent? Because there's a $4,000 delta there, which is about 50 grand a year. Now, to Rob and Tom's credit, they're putting up 600 grand into this thing, which, God bless them. But that doesn't change the fact that, and I'll put it to you this way. My brothers and I have owned commercial real estate, and we've done things in the past. Matt, you, and be in the commercial real estate, I'm gonna ask your advice on something. I wanna build a building, and it's gonna cost me $1 million, and I'm gonna get a mortgage on it, and it's gonna cost me $7,500 a month, and I'm gonna rent it out for $3,500. Why would I do that? Why would I be $4,000 short of my nut so to speak, my monthly number. Is there a, reasonable explanation on why I would do that?
Even for a municipality, I can't think.
Okay,
And if you were a bank, I don't think that you would give us the loan.
Absolutely not.
okay. Now, okay, now here's the thing, and honestly, but I want to switch back to that 1 million. I'm going to give you a tale of two cities that I've seen in 2 years as supervisor. And Art Patron's not here tonight, but Patty, you can corroborate if this story is true. Art's got that project going on over at the sewer plant. Phase 1, part of it was an accessory building. But we really never had the engineers do an in-depth PER. So they looked at it and they noodled it. Didn't do an in-depth one, and they said it was going to cost X. And Patty, Art, and I said, that just doesn't make any sense. So Art went out and they did a more in-depth thing, and wasn't the estimated cost come back like half of that?
Just about.
Okay. So is this $1 million a voodoo economics? Maybe a full PER bill, what does that stand for?
Professional performance engineering.
Report, or whatever, and maybe it would manifest that this only costs $500,000. Well, then this is not an issue. Because am I right to assume, Paul, that a $500,000 bond is half of $1 million bond? So the nut for the taxpayers in the town would be $3,750 a month. That's $7,500.
That's more like that.
Rob and Tom want to pay about $3,700 a month in rent. It sounds like we're there.
Sounds like you gotta build a $500,000 building.
Shell with whatever, right, Bill? Now, I just gave you I gave you the tale of two cities. That was the good one. Now I'm going to be the buzzkill.
There's another tale?
The sucking tail. You don't know your Dickens. Anyway, we all know it's June of 2022. What does it cost when gas is $5 a gallon? If we go out and do a PER with inflation the way it is and supply chains, what are we going to get back on the cost of a 2,400 square foot building? Shell, on a slab, whatever. I don't know.
Until you do it.
So that's an interesting conundrum per se. And maybe it's not, because the board appetite might be that, hey, you know what? We feel fine about being $4,000 upside down at this thing because, whatever. Wow, I see some heads in the crowd shaking now. If the board does feel fine about that, I would say that anybody in this crowd and watching on TV who's a voter, you should vote us all out of office because we are not fiscally responsible and being stewards of the taxpayers' money. Now, the good news, in my opinion, is, and Chris, we don't have the engineers like Mary or Pat. I'll say Pat's kind of engineer or highway superintendent. But we got Bill. So I think you can corroborate this, Bill, and you maybe have heard it, is that because of what's happening there this summer down at Sandbar Park, has anybody driven down there to see what it looks like?
It's starting to look like a park.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of dirt being moved around. A lot of fill, huh, Bill?
Yep.
A lot of fill. And when they fill and bring that land up where the old Bayside used to be, which is the footprint where the new restaurant will go, I've been told that that has got to settle for 6 months before any construction can start of a slab. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, it depends on how they fill it. Now, if they just filled it as fill and just laid it in and didn't compact every layer, then yeah, it's going to take time to settle and.
Right. Well, next week is July 1st. That's not even close to being done. We think, Chris, we're gearing it around October 31st. By November 1, lo and behold, that's when the access bridge opens back up. We need it to be, good. I don't know. Could be seasonal things to this, whatever, but November 1, if the construction management says it is now a 6-month clock starts on its settling, you really can't start construction on any slab or whatever until, is that May 1st? Is that 6 months, May 1st? I guess what I'm trying to say is we have the luxury of time. But I also either want to get to brass tacks on this, I don't want to hold Rob and Tom up. Either we can come up with something that works for everybody, or we can't. So it really, to me, and I'm oversimplifying it as we sit here on June 23rd, we somehow figure out how to get a reasonable estimate of what this building is going to cost, the shell, and see if it's the $1 million that has been floating around out there, or if it's closer to 500,000. Or if we can't go and do that and we just stick with the $1 million, then the board has to decide in a way, are they okay with going down the primrose path of being $4,000 upside down?
I think we know the answer to that.
It's a rhetorical question, yeah. So, I don't know. I mean, thank you, Chris. I don't know the answer because first of all, I don't think I could, in good faith, I couldn't say to Rob and Tom, why don't you go and spend your money on an engineer to do a PER? That's not fair. But then again, because whatever design of building we're gonna do, so much of that is gonna be the restaurateur is in there. I wouldn't even know what to tell an engineer and have the town pay for that because we would have to be really far down the line with the restaurateur. We'd be probably into contracts and licensing agreements by that point, wouldn't we, Charlie?
Well, yes.
Yeah, because I can't advocate for the town spending that money on what? On what design? Because obviously, if the design, Bill, you know better, 2,400
Four
square
walls,
feet.
some windows and a roof, and you get a basic design.
So you think we could do that?
Sure. Be basic. Interior would be open. You'd have exterior walls and a roof, and a slab. Any interior walls that they needed, they would put up when they do the interior work.
With that font, do you think that 600,000 is enough to build that out inside?
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't either. It seems low to me when you consider all the equipment and everything else it's got.
Well, no, that's them.
No, I'm saying that, but they projected 600.
Oh, you're saying that
Their
them
projection
to
is
build from
600
the
to
shell.
build out, Yep.
Right, and they're asking for
Gotcha.
concessions to help with that $600,000 cost.
Well,
Well, I think that we need a lot more specificity as we move forward for both the taxpayers of Webster and also the potential tenants.
well, yeah, and like I said, I don't want to have Rob and Tom dangling for a long time. So we're gonna have to, Chris, maybe we come back in the next month and.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, the intent tonight was so that you guys, everybody got an idea of where we stood, because obviously with this having sort of closed from a submission standpoint 2 months ago or so, 2.5 months ago, want to make sure everybody kind of stood where we've been in that time.
Yeah, I appreciate the update, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. All right, it's the Charlie Genesi Town Attorney Show now.
I think the time's all used up.
Yeah, the tale of two cities, they just ran on.
I think he's gonna start reading. Best
Lucky you didn't have to
Best
read
of
it.
times, worst of times. That's it, yeah, okay. The agenda speaks of discussion of environmental testing of 600 Ridge Road. That in fact is what is the ultimate subject of this, but I've handed out something to all of you. I'm glad that Chad is here because he's very familiar with this. I've been doing some looking into and research into what needs to be done at the site, and I'm going to speak in generalities because this would be for any site that we're talking about, but as a prelude, I just want to mention that and Matt is aware of this because he assisted with an attempt to get a grant back in 2017, I believe it was, which we didn't get, but the prior administration was working on this probably since 2014. We've been trying to do something with this corner, and it's gone through numerous owners. There was a prior owner of the building who passed away. It went to his estate. It was then foreclosed upon numerous times by the county for failure to pay taxes. And so we've had a problem finding an actual owner, and plus there's been tax liens in the tens of thousands of dollars on this property. So we've been stopped from doing much of anything because we couldn't find out who the owner was. There have been multiple owners since the prior owner passed away. Those owners who purchased the tax liens, I'll say the tax lien owners on the property. Furthermore, there's issues with the environmental, potential environmental concerns with the property because it was a furniture stripping store. There were a lot of chemicals used in the business that was conducted there. We have met numerous times in the recent last year or so since Supervisor Flaherty's been in office with the county, and we, I believe, have a path going forward. I'm going to explain some of the items that need to be looked at and done and where the county comes in on this. Basically, I've handed you just a couple of pieces of paper here, and you can make notes if you wish. Main question is cleaning up of what's called brownfields. I mean, a brownfield is basically any property that has been environmentally damaged and needs cleaning before it can be properly used. There are numerous agencies, both federal and state. The state agencies, Department of Environmental Conservation, the federal agencies, Environmental Protection Agency. But the state regulations pretty much govern what we can do. And there are basically three types of actions that a municipality or a proposed developer or owner needs to do in looking at a property such as 600 Ridge. And those are called Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3 site assessments. Now, Phase 1 assessment is it's a study conducted on a property to evaluate the likelihood of environmental contamination. That's right from the law, the regulations. Generally, the costs are between $1,000 and $2,000, and I believe we have done the Phase 1 on this property, correct? Or it's been done.
We were able to obtain, without paying specifically for Phase 1, we obtained oil records from DEC on this property that has been accepted as Phase 1, yeah.
Right.
It was free.
Correct. Yeah, well, it didn't cost us anything.
It didn't cost us.
Which is great, which is great. But it's effectively been done.
Yes.
All right. Having had that information, we presented that to the county, which has been foreclosing on it routinely for failure to pay taxes. And we are hoping to go to a Phase 2. Now, that's a follow-up to Phase 1. It's also known as a subsurface investigation or a site investigation. And this means actually entering the property, collecting samples of soil, soil gas, vapor intrusion, groundwater samples, and then sending the same to a laboratory for impact. Now, generally the costs are between $5,000 and $100,000, and a property like this is probably closer to the lower amount initially. Once that is done, it's determined whether or not Phase 3, which is removal of any contamination and remediation, is recommended. And Bill, feel free, I know you're an expert in this, so feel free to jump in at any time on this. Now, where we are right now is with the property, this particular property, is we have talked to the county, and we are in process of working with them under the Environmental Conservation Law, particularly Section 56-0508, because they, having the authority and the power to foreclose on a tax lien. I'm going to read this. This is dry, but I'm going to read it. May, upon 20 days' notice, seek an order of the court obtaining, quote, temporary incidents of ownership of such of a property for the sole purpose of entering the property and conducting an environmental restorative investigation. I don't know if the county's ever done this before. We did meet with various people in the county, the real property manager, real property office, the deputy county attorney, etc. They are interested in doing this. They did foreclose for, I think, the third time last week on the 15th. The property was attempted to be sold at the standard foreclosure auction. Nobody bought it, so the county effectively owns the property. They would have to, however, as the agency foreclosing, go to court and seek the quote-unquote temporary incidence of ownership so that they or somebody that they designate may enter the property. Right now, the town cannot enter this property. We don't have the authority or right to do it. It is still private property. So, hopefully that will be done within the next month or two. They will have to go to court. They will determine what the cost of a phase 2 is, and the county and the town will go into discussions. There are other concerns with the town getting involved, and the town does want to get involved. We do want to clean this site up. As I said, we've been working on this, looking at this. I go by it 10 times a week myself. Probably for a good 8 years. And we would like to see this property developed into something useful and clean. There is a question of whether or not there's civil liability. There may be civil liability by the town or the county for anybody going in there for any negligence, any damages done, not so much to the property, but to the environment, to two different places, or two different entities. One is the governmental agencies. The EPA and the DEC could actually look at whoever is trying to develop the property or clean up the property, be it the town or a private individual, and find they're not doing it correctly or improperly, and levy fines or require certain actions or costs. That's number one. Number two, there's also the potential, and I'm underscoring potential, liability to individuals who may be affected by a cleanup. For example, if you go into a property and you dig up and open up a field where gases or liquids seep out and go into somebody else's property and cause either physical damage or property damage, you could be opening yourself up to liability. And it could be pretty great liability. Now the good news in looking at the law on this is that there are tax credits for developers, private developers who go in and develop a property or clean up a property, and there are both, there's tax credits both federally and particularly through the state, through the what's called the Brownfield Cleanup Program, BCP, which was enacted back in 2015, and the state has expended billions of dollars on this program, and it's something that a private developer would apply to the DEC for, and they would receive tax credits, not grants necessarily, but tax credits. So anyway, this is just the first and probably what will be a number of discussions or reports I will have. This is just to give you an idea of what can be done down the road. We are working actively on this as best we can. It's been frustrating at every turn. As I say, Matt Chatfield's been involved for at least 5 years, he can tell you. The current supervisor's been involved since he's been in office, and all the board members are pretty aware of this particular corner, which potentially can be a great commercial corner. And I think that's something that would benefit the town, and both visually and economically. So, anybody have any questions on this?
Yeah, if we pay for the testing, we're not obligated in any way to do any type of cleanup.
No, I'm thinking that the county they've already they have indicated to me that they expect us to pay for the phase 2. But they're going to go out and shop around and get somebody to do it, at least to give us a price. So I know, no, we'll find something. If we don't like the price, we're going to find something.
Well, why can't we solicit? Because if we're obligated to pay for it, or they don't want to share in the cost, we're not obligated.
Yeah, no,
that's the wrong word.
That's what I said. The frustrating part about this is we're the ones that are most affected. We have, well, the county is too, but we're more affected. We have our hands tied. They are the only ones by law that can go in and get this temporary incidence of ownership. And they call it just temporary ownership. They can go in and basically own the property long enough to get somebody to come in and assess the environment. And then we go from there.
And John and Charlie, you know, it's interesting. You did a very nice summary. I will say this, that you might remember that 15 months ago, in March of 2021, we had Logier Consultants who we've been working with, and they gave us a $12,000 estimate to go and do the boring holes and all the phase 2 testing. Had a workshop on it, and at that town board workshop 15 months ago, what manifested itself at that time was 2 hurdles. One, it's a privately owned property. How does the town board justify putting taxpayer money onto a private property? That's a problem. That's a hurdle. The second hurdle, though, is the one that is the one I cannot get my mind around if there's any major risk of this, and that is that if we quarterback that testing and it shows that there's $1 billion of cleanup, the town cannot be in the liability position to do that. And that was what happened 15 months ago. And so we went back to the drawing board to try to address those 2 things. Now the reality is this, and it's been, you know, the town directly has nothing to do with this property. That's a fact. Chain of title and how it works, the county is the straw that stirs the drink. They do real estate tax foreclosures. That's how it works. They've actually foreclosed on it about 17 times, Charlie, not 3 times, and they do not own the property.
No.
Because what the county does...
They sell the tax liens.
And this is, you know, well, they used to sell the tax liens, but until the people who bought the tax liens, they weren't going to buy them on this property anymore, because it got 7, 10, 15, 20 years delinquent. The county does this thing where at their tax foreclosure, if nobody buys it at the auction, then they look at the property and say, there might be some environmental issues here. We don't want it, and they give it back to the private owner. And this happens, and then we just keep going and keep going and keep going. There's no end in sight, right? That's why that property has sat there for 20 years. Now, I'm going to call it what it is. It's a quid pro quo. I love that term. Last couple of years it's gotten an ugly mark on it, but I still like the term. Is that great? Or is it?
No, it's this way.
It is like yes. So it really comes down to this. The county will play ball with us, with the town. If we agree in an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, or an IMA, an intermunicipal agreement with them, to bear the cost of this phase 2 testing, and in exchange, Charlie, they will execute all that court mumbo jumbo that you just said for the 20 days and get temporary control so we can go do the testing. Now, that brings us right back to full circle of 15 months ago. Does the town board, as we're working with the county on this, how do they feel about the town paying money for, well, Logier was going to do it for 12 grand. The county has to do it with their contact. They said this to us. It's not, they don't bid it out. They have a firm they do business with under contract, and their attorneys are looking to give the scope and whatever. We haven't heard that price tag. No. But we have a point of reference because Logier Consultants was going to do it for $12,000. So issue 1, right back to 15 months ago, is how do we feel about the town paying for that? Now the reality is this, we in the last 15 months have other funding options now. We have ARPA money that could be used for this, right? And the second thing, and this is the one that I still, you know, and Charlie, this is where we need your assistance. And the county feels very strongly, 2 attorneys at that last meeting, right? They brought 2 of them, Charlie. That tells you how serious. They made it pretty clear that this process you just described totally keeps them out of the liability of any found problems.
Keeps them out.
Keeps them out. But they said, and I give them credit for this, one attorney to another, professional courtesy, Charlie, we're not making any statements that keeps the town on a liability. So that's where it's on us to do that research, precedence, all that, to see if we agree to do it, how do we feel about the chance that the town would be in a risk liability if there is a ton of remediation?
And that'll be something, obviously, I will advise the board on, probably, a workshop or something if we're talking about, or, sorry, an executive session. But I think we have to look at each step. We have to see what the liability is of phase 2, and then beyond phase 2, if there's anything necessary. There may not be liability in phase 2, there may be in phase 3. And so it's really not, I've done a lot of research on it, it's not clear.
No, it's not. I mean, that's where...
And that's, the one thing that's good is I think the state, which of course has put an enormous amount of regulation here, did come up with this BCP program because I think they realized they wanted to encourage a cleanup of these, that having dirty property sitting around was doing nobody any good. They wanted people to get involved, and they realized they had too many penalties and not, well, I guess too much stick and not enough carrot. So,
yeah. And Matt, you're here, and not at the podium, but we're in the middle of we got a grant for looking at the whole neighborhood there, the West Webster hamlet, and the focal point, the nucleus of that hamlet is ridge and gravel. And ridge and gravel, everybody knows, is 600 Ridge, the furniture strippers, and the old Jade Palace. Like I said before, the town has no direct tie to this stuff, legally and whatever. The town's problem is that property sits in our town, and if something isn't done on it, then it just will continue the degradation of that whole neighborhood. So this grant that we got, and is it not Nichols, who's the consulting firm that's... Ingalls. This is all for naught, if you ask me, if we don't in parallel get this thing taken care of. It's all for naught. So,
anyway, this is only part one.
Yeah.
We'll go.
Yeah, because you're right. If they come back and say our contractor says it's $97,000 to do that testing, well, that's that. I didn't say at the time I'd advocate we pay 97 grand. I think 12,000 from Logier for the scope and all that. Okay, that's we can talk about that, right? So we'll see. You're right. We have to see.
One thing I will say I'm pleased about is that finally they have, as you commented from the last meeting, they had 2 attorneys and other personnel. They have finally taken an interest in this product, which is good. So
Yeah, we'll see.
hopefully we can work out a partnership of sorts.
Thanks. Any other comments, questions on that one, on our good friend 600 Ridge? Yeah.
All right.
Charlie, finish us up.
All right. This is something that I'm presenting, and I sent all of you a confidential memo, which I would ask you to give me back after discussing. This is in regard to what's called tax certiorari litigation, which we always have dozens of these process at any given time. The reason I put this on at this time is because the town and the school district are both seeking approval of their respective boards. The school district is meeting on the 5th of July. We do not have a meeting until the 7th. We wanted to get this thing moving for both administrative purposes, so the assessor can change the role as need be if the town and the school district approve, and also frankly to get this off the table because we've done a lot of work on it. Now, this involves the Target store, which commenced back in 2019. Article 70 proceeding has commenced proceedings every year thereafter. They have not yet proceeded or started proceeding this year because it's too soon. They would have to wait until actually August 1st is the absolute first date they can file. But this will take care of this year as well. I've given you a breakdown of basically of the history of the litigation in this process. For the record, it's the property's at 1050 Ridge Road. You have the tax account number. You know it sits at the Webster Town Center Plaza. The town, or I'm sorry, the school district attorney and myself have worked with the attorney for Target and trying to craft a resolution of the litigation. We have had an appraiser look at the property, give us expert opinion. What is interesting is that the town, unfortunately, has been both benefited and hurt by the increase in value. It's hard to explain, but generally speaking, what's called the equalization rate goes down as the property values go up until we have a revaluation. We've not had a revaluation since 2004. We are looking hopefully at one next year, but that's in process. Bottom line is, because of the lowering of the equalization rate and the assessment staying the same, the market value of the property continues to climb. Because of that, the property may be overassessed, or at least it's overassessed according to the petitioner. And we have come to a compromise, which I've laid out for you, and thanks to both the assessor and the town clerk for assisting with the table, which is the last page I've given you. And it shows that over the 4 years, the assessed value for the 4 years has been $10,500,000. The agreement that we came to was no reduction for the year 2019, which was the first year, therefore there will be no refunds requested by me or by anybody else. There is a reduction in value of $1,535,000 for the year 2020, which we calculated a refund in the amount of $8,132.05. For the year 2021, there is a reduction of $2 million, so the assessed value will go down to $8,500,000. The calculated refund will be $10,865.81. This year, we have consented to a roll, which will be a correction on roll, of a reduction of $3,154,800. There will be no refund because the roll will be corrected. So the total town calculated refund will be $18,997.86. Now, the question is, all right, why should we do this? Because frankly, we do have an exchange date. It's in the future, but we are bound to turn over our appraisal, as is the other side. We are convinced that if we do that, the court will look at this, and two things will happen. That we will probably or possibly have a judgment or a ruling by the court which will be less than this agreement, number one. Number two, interest and penalties will probably accrue. So I am recommending, based on the memo that I've sent you, that the town board agree to pay this refund in the amount of $18,997.86.
Charlie, this would be something we have a resolution in.
I will know today. I'll draw up a resolution, just a resolution to approve the settlement. This is a settlement. It's not going to go into effect until, frankly, until the school district approves also. So both of us will have to be on board. I'm not going to sign anything until both parties agree. The assessor's on board with this.
That's one thing to ask. I mean, this is a tangential sort of question, but I agree with what you're saying. Where does money come from? What fund is money?
That I don't know.
This is not the first time we've done this year.
No, we'll probably be doing it other times. Right. Yeah. We have a lot of litigation, but we try to settle them going forward only when, or been dismissed, but occasionally, when we get an expert, we're bound by that expert.
Sure, no, I understand, I'm just trying to,
No.
when it comes
Where
out
the
of
money-
reserve
where the
account.
money- there is no fund. Unlike the school district, and this is where we're
Right.
sort of, the school district actually has a certiorari fund. They can go in there and dip into it and take their refunds out. But their refunds are always 5 times ours, so their refunds
Sure.
are close to 100,000. But that's not our problem, it's their problem. Our problem is coming up with the 18.
I understand. I should
Take
probably.
it out of fund balance. I think Paul takes it out of fund balance.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, makes
Yeah.
sense.
And I don't, is this the whole plaza?
No,
It's just
Target.
We actually are, I'll be coming with other parcels which are also, so we took care of the paychecks earlier this year, I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
The old paychecks bill,
Yeah.
and Kohl's, we're in the process of subbing Kohl's, but I'll give you information on that. Different time.
Well, I misunderstood, that when we added this, that you were going to explain and then we'll do the resolution at the board meeting, but it's not without precedent that we've done resolutions.
Oh, you could, it's up to you, I'm asking the
Workshop.
board to do it now based on this, it's just, I mean, like I say, I'll prepare the resolution for the town clerk.
Yeah, because based on what you've said and what I read here and since Donna, it makes sense to me. I just don't know how, the rest of the board feels about doing it tonight versus July 7th, and is there any problem doing it July 7th based on is like the school board waiting, will they not do it on July 5th if we haven't already done it?
I don't think so, I don't think that'll matter, if you feel more comfortable doing it July 7th, it's fine. I just wanted to get it done because we always do it before they do, they always seem to take a while.
Well, and it's just, we haven't, and I might be overthinking this, all four of you of the board talked me down on this one, is that we've done resolutions at workshops, but I've kind of gotten the feeling that we haven't done one where we're spending taxpayer money. And the fact that this just hit the agenda today, it doesn't.
If we're not obligated, if we're not obligated by time,
To do it today.
I just assume wait.
Okay, that's fine.
That's just my opinion.
Because then we can put it on the July 7th.
You've already got to hold on to the memos, if you have any further questions, I just want to get them back, because they're confidential legal.
I'm gonna give it back to you.
Do you, Bill and Patty, am I overthinking that one?
Well, no, your reasoning is valid. I don't have a problem with doing it tonight because we know we're going to be doing it in 2 weeks. But your reasoning is valid and I'm fine with it.
Too nice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Well, guess what?
Thanks, Charlie.
7:04, and that concludes the town board workshop for June 23rd. And Bill, there will be no special workshop or board meeting on Thursday, July 30th.
Happy 4th of July.
That's right.
Safe
You
weekend.
said July 30th? You mean
June 30th. Yeah. July 7th is our next full board meeting in this room, 7:30 p.m.
Tom, I guess it's really new. Take a look at this letter.
Great. Actually, Doug, do you mind if I hand these to you to give to Kim tomorrow, because I won't be in?
Sure, that's no problem.
So. I'm gonna give these all to Kim. I'm gonna give you that letter, Kim. I'll give you this letter back. Yes, ma'am. About what? Yeah, you know what, I misinterpreted it.
That's what you wanted.
Yeah,